And that's one of the things that we're looking to hear some feedback on is A or B more to your liking, and or does it need a modification? I think I hear in what you're saying is that even under B, and if you would, Jennifer, show B, that if we do put the lane on the facility, that we do at least a 2-foot protect and buffer. This shows the buffer, but not the protect. The channels and posts aren't that terrible expensive. We could go to that protected feature. I'm putting one on the ground right now, and the cost is pretty manageable. So that's option B, is pretty close to what you're asking, but not up on the sidewalk was a different issue. I'll unpack in a second, but let me take a breath because I hear you.
So I've got 2 questions there. In both of these concepts, y'all have the lighting over the roadway, but not the sidewalk. It seems to me that cars have headlights and pedestrians don't. So it seems that the lighting would be better facing over the pedestrian space. I mean, that is a odd oversight to me.
That's sort of a placeholder fixture. Don't take too much from that. But next month we're going to hit lighting head on for like an hour.
Well, I think it speaks volumes to where y'all's attention's focused.
No, that's a pedestrian light on the back side of it. It's a dual pedestrian roadway light, Charles. We picked for that purpose, but that's not the fixture we're trying to suggest. But it does have both functions.
And as far as the placement of the pole, once again, the light pole being on the inside of the bike lane rather than the outside of the bike lane. I'm not talking about putting bikes on the sidewalk. I'm talking about moving the curb to the outside of the bike lane. Therefore, that way you could have the lighting and a curb between the bikes and pedestrians and the vehicles.
Okay, I've noted that. I hear you there. It does come with some complexities when you approach an intersection, some design challenges with where your stop bar is, where the curb ends, and turning movements occasionally and such, but nothing that is impossible to be worked out. So that is an option, and I hear your support for such. Who else we got that? I know we've got some other folks who are wanting to make sure the bikes and peds are taken care of. So you liking the A concept or you liking the B concept? I'll start calling names. There are some trade-offs here.
Derek, yeah, I'm
Please.
noticing the sidewalk variances that you have at the bottom. And
Yes.
I would say that I do prefer the planting strip on the vehicle side of the sidewalk. And I would also add that if bioswales could be considered in the planting strips to reduce maintenance, but also to help drainage from all the massive runoff that will be generated by all this new concrete, that'd be nice too. Could y'all click back to option 1 again?
Sure. We're playing with some GI features and different lid approaches, and we're going to come back to you at the next LCAG in October with a breakdown of what we're trying to achieve in terms of GI green infrastructure. That is. If
y'all could, I like how y'all did the sidewalk variances on both of those. If y'all could do that for, the bike infrastructure as well, rather than just, I just think these two options are, very, very similar. The only real thing that jumps out is the sidewalk variance, choice, being a much larger benefit to pedestrians than the other. But we don't have that same option really for the cyclists.
I see. And what we mean by the variance is a little bit more like along the couple of miles of the corridor, there would be sections of both potentially. And you could see how, like, if this was an older corridor and the private development was still coming in and doing sidewalk improvements and half street improvements, Some of them might want more paving, and they might want their fruit stand and their dining tables to spill out into it. And others might want the GI and the street trees and the division. There's a certain rhythm to how you want your GI and your street trees and such related to the inlets and cost constraints and that sort of thing. So that's sort of how we wanted to show that in some places you might get a 12-foot sidewalk, in some places you might get a street tree, in some places you might get some bioinfiltration. And we'll get to that later level of detail a little bit next month.
I understand. One, basically, you took up the pedestrian right of way with a planting strip. Y'all didn't add it in. You just took out
Right.
half of the pavement and put
Essentially, yes, sir.
I see.
Well, what do y'all think about the bike lane essentially being on the northbound? So it will be a more comfortable ride for folks. It'd be more like riding through your neighborhood than it would be riding on a big street, right? That being said, that's not the side that maybe is where your destination would be. So you'd still have to cross over at some point. I think it has some certain benefits. I think that there's a variety of cyclists who are going to be comfortable in different scenarios. What do y'all think? Do you like the bike lanes more focused on the northbound, or do you think they ought to be properly integrated into the boulevard itself? Or if you need more data to think about that, or how can we get back to you with something else that would help you inform that decision? I'm encouraging LCG and APC folks to speak up as well. A lot of y'all have technical training in this kind of thing and your own opinions, both of which we'd like to hear about.
Well, as the fire chief, this is Robert Benoit, Fire Department, Lafayette Fire Department. As the fire chief, who's been watching this for the past couple of years, my concern is emergency vehicles. I'm not too concerned about the sidewalks as long as whatever you're doing doesn't block the path that an emergency vehicle can use to be able to get from point A to point B to be able to do our job.
That's excellent input. In fact, we should probably have a breakout with you specifically once we get closer to some more numbers after the next meeting, and make sure that your thinking is applied to what we're doing. That's great.
Okay, Derek, I'm guess I'm kind of understanding what you were talking about, the northbound versus the boulevard a little better now. Option A is what you're saying is the bike lane would be in the northbound lane of the current one and not in the boulevard. There would just be a 6-foot shoulder, correct?
Essentially.
Okay. Why wouldn't you be able to incorporate bike infrastructure into both?
Well, we probably could. And to some extent, this is a bike infrastructure in that a shoulder is infrastructure. It's just it's not a more sophisticated application, but obviously it functions in that manner, right? And this is actually the DOTD digging in and making sure that every street is complete by insisting on a shoulder. Now, the question would be whether or not, since we're going to have the shoulder anyways, why not just mark it and sign it like a bike lane, right?
Well, and at intersections, it does not function like a bike lane. It immediately functions like a portion of a turning lane, and having a shoulder with no infrastructure in it induces faster speeds because there's no traffic calming with a shoulder. It actually makes it where people drive faster. So having a shoulder with nothing in it is only going to keep the speeds high in that area. And that's already an area with a lot of pedestrian activity. Mm-hmm. And of the areas of Lafayette that have the highest number of pedestrian deaths, it is currently on the thruway. And it's because, like this, the thruway has largely been designed for vehicles, with pedestrians being an afterthought, squeezing them in where they can and saying, use narrow sidewalks and cross where you can, rather than saying, oh, let's make this shoulder a protected bike lane rather than a gutter for trash and runoff.
We had some great conversations about that. And yeah, a shoulder, someone turning right somewhere along the way can cut that corner off. Regrettably, they can cut it off on a bike lane too, unless there's a stanchion, and then they'll do that half the time too.
Well, that's fine. They'd be
flattened.
They would be hitting the curb before they hit the pedestrian, and I think that's, you know, a black mark on a curb is much less of a problem than a tire mark over somebody's body.
Oh, indeed, right. And I think this embraces that. I think part of the conversation with the bike lane got to the extent to which, so, you know, the concept started with, well, let's make a more comfortable cycling corridor on the northbound, right? But then the DOTD is still wanting each street to be complete and still would want something on the southbound because they're abiding by that policy. And then it got into a question of whether or not we would want it to be there for the willing, or if we would actually encourage people to it, right? Which once you go to the thermoplast or the MMA and you do some appropriate signage markings and you do some of the bike wayfinding, which the city has embraced to say, you know, this is your way to the following destinations, then we're actually bringing people out there that may not be that proficient, and they're being brought into a higher volume, slightly higher speed environment with lots of turning movements and such. And so we thought, you know, that was the crux of that conversation. That being said, that's why we're coming to y'all, right? If everybody on the call says, well, why don't you just go ahead and make that a bike lane? Well, then we'll take note.
Yes, and I would add on the bike lanes, you know, my preference would be curb protected bike lanes over thermoplast, because, you know, thermoplast, it does nothing but give someone something to drive over. At least a curb actually protects cyclists. As it is, you know, Louisiana state law requires vehicles to drive 3 feet around cyclists, but y'all only have 4-foot bike lanes. So, you know, y'all are just getting around the traffic law otherwise and allowing these cars to drive closer to cyclists than they would if there was no bike lane. So I think a protective curb is much preferable to thermoplast in a 4-foot bike lane any day.
Okay. Let's go to, Jennifer, let's go to some of those oblique views that give a little bit more detail, help put this into context, either A or B. And we'll continue almost the same conversation, but with a different look at things. Now, don't take everything too seriously here. Like I said, we're going to come back to you about lighting. So these lighting fixtures, these mast arms, some of that's just placeholder stuff. But that being said, if you tell us, I hate that placeholder, well then we'll know something now. But we will come back to that in more detail. So there's other stuff in here that we're not saying we're building. We are saying that we're going to build 11-foot travel lanes, 2 in each direction. We are saying that we're going to build a sidewalk, yada, yada. We're not committing to the recessed median yet. We're not committing to the street trees and tree grates yet. Those are still options that we're playing with. But it gives you a different look at it, brings some other things into the conversation as well.
Yeah, so in looking at this, I see the 11-foot setback zone. I'm noticing that. Is there a reason that the pedestrian infrastructure is not closer to the backside of the right-of-way instead of adjacent to the roadway?
That is an area that we had a good bit of talk about that as well. It would be used for some utilities. There's some conversations about certain things undergrounding, certain things that are already underground and always go underground. And then there will be occasional need for some slopes and a little bit of road buildup just to get the grades right and such. So that area is for that. I think that it's also envisioned, and you can sort of see it on a couple of little renderings, that through one means or another, it would enable the adjacent property owner to spill out onto it, especially with commercial development to some extent. And that would be a sort of a potential joint use or easement type of thing in that space. But I don't know if one of the roadway folks on the phone wants to speak to that. Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, this is Gary. I'll just speak to that a little bit. We would typically have the sidewalk up against the curb like you see here. And like Derek said, we need some space to accommodate utilities along the corridor, to accommodate the differences in elevations between the existing ground and what we're building. So looking at this, I don't see why we could not, put the 12-foot sidewalk, offset totally almost near the right-of-way line, up against the right-of-way line, and have some buffer space between the sidewalk and the curb, or some combination of that. Again, this was our initial depiction of how the sidewalk and have some utility space and slope space could be accommodated.
Yeah, Gary, I appreciate that.
Yeah,
And
we can certainly discuss that some more.
Well, I would just like to, as y'all did the variance with the planning strip before, I'd like, to just voice my, preference for the same, having a variance to, where possible, have the bike and ped infrastructure not only protected, but further set back, within the right of way where possible. Utilities can probably, just easily be on one side of the sidewalk as the other. I understand on sloping, that's not the same case, but where possible, that would be a big benefit. I think it would allow us to also, it would give the trees on the sidewalk a little more room to cover the, to grow and cover the sidewalk, and probably provide a little more shade. Anyway, that's generally, I think that would be of some benefit.
Anyone else have some thoughts about that setback and that arrangement and the way adjacent properties would occupy that space or not? Jennifer, just toggle between a few more of these obliques and just show a couple options, like the one with the GI in there. So this shows some smaller bioinfiltration cells, and this is option B that has the bike lane actually on it with the 2-foot buffer, not showing protected buffer yet, just the buffer. And then this shows some of those bioinfiltration swales. How many of these we can actually do, how many we actually need in terms of drainage and handling the volumes and such is something we're still working on. So those are just sort of placeholder designs. Don't take too much into those specifically, but we know that, and this all can be mixed up too, but the trees can go in these cells. They can go in a generally small landscaping plot, even if it's not used for bioinfiltration, like some of the downtown stuff is along Jefferson, or it can just have a tree grate on it. So those would be some options we'd like to hear about as well. We've heard lots of general support for GI, but we can do large detention retention facilities that still serve GI purposes in the little triangles of right-of-way that we have left over associated with ramps and things of that sort. Or it could be built into the sidewalk, which turns into a very different type of design. So if anyone has preferences on that, that's going to be a big topic when we get together next, but we're open to the input now as well to help guide us for the next month.
Hey, Derek, go ahead. Sorry, Charles.
Oh, no, that's fine. I just wanted to say, this view, option B, looks much better. I like it very much compared, like I said, with my preference for the protected bike lane, a curb protected bike lane, not just with with light sticks or whatever they're called. The bioinfiltration I like, and I would also add that my preference on, bioinfiltration and bioswales in general where they're designed for lower maintenance, I think it's
Yes.
especially in a city like Lafayette where we already have a drainage problem.
Mhm.
You just mentioned, the amount of need that they have. I think overall on this project, I think rather than look for need, I think if we could default to look for opportunity, that would be a pretty good way to
Mhm.
mitigate a lot of the problems by going above and beyond in putting those in could, in the long term, help cut back on some of our maintenance costs as far as mowing, et cetera, but also improve the drainage for an area of town that currently doesn't flood, but with this much impermeable surface going in, doesn't have much margin for error. And so anyway, I would just say I'd like to default to using every opportunity for that rather than just as needed, so to say.
Those are
It's been a big
great
emphasis of the
comments.
mayor in our interactions. I'm sorry, Jennifer.
No, I was going to say those are great comments that we will note. Just in the interest of kind of getting to bike network connectivity, I don't know if you want to show the roundabout option, but we probably ought to be.
Oh, thanks for nudging us along, Jennifer. Yes, let's go the roundabout. Yes.
I try to be diplomatic.
Similar dimensions. Obviously, we're not comparing an intersection, but there was sort of an intersection in the middle of that last drawing. This gives you a different look at things. The jury is still out as to what we can do in the middle of the roundabout. Some studies and some agencies don't like anything vertical that could be a crash hazard or a visual hazard or blocking visuals or anything. But at any rate, what could go in a roundabout is a discussion we're going to have and will be had. But this just shows a similar situation. And I think this shows something which we can also use the line work to really get into the details of. This shows some of the pedestrian crossings, right? Which for a roundabout are a very different circumstance, much safer, very different sets of things that they have to pay attention to. It requires a tiny bit of out of direction travel, but the trade-off is that you're not going to get killed. Even if you blunder out in front of a car for somehow it's going to be an injury and it's not going to be a fatality. These have proven to greatly reduce number of severe crashes, injurious crashes, fatal crashes, et cetera, including with pedestrians. A lot of striping here. You can see we're still working on the striping as per DOTD and AASHTO and such. We can come back to this if there's any reflections on the roundabout specifically.
Was that the only roundabout design that y'all had to present?
Yes.
Or was it okay? Okay.
We can show a plan view.
Well, yeah.
No,
I thought you might have two that we were comparing. That's all I was asking before I made too much comment.
Gotcha.
I'm assuming that left right would be east west. So I'm just going to say, on the left right, I notice y'all have these medians, but there's this opportunity in the line work on the north south to add a median between lanes so that pedestrians were only crossing a single lane. If they had to stop, they would have an area to do so. I think that could be of some benefit. Rather than just have a strip of pavement for just because, if there was a little more pedestrian protection there, that would be a benefit. And then similarly, if there were protected bike lanes throughout the roundabout, I'd like to see that as well.
All right. A couple of things there. The ped refuge. So essentially the pedestrian has a safe place in between crossing the lanes, often not in between two, but we still hear you on that. And ped refuge, we did work into the median design even when there's in one location a double left, we've still made sure the median was sized so that you can still have a small ped refuge in there.
Well,
The other question is, go ahead.
Sorry, Derek, I just wanted to clarify. The comment wasn't saying where 2 lanes put a pedestrian refuge. It was saying where opportunity in the line work on 2 lanes put a pedestrian refuge. Because in the south, it's the south northbound lane on this rendering. You know, there's this large strip in the middle of the 2 lanes. That's more what I'm trying to point out, that where rather than leave a wasted opportunity, I would much rather see a pedestrian refuge right there.
Thank you for the refinement. I see exactly what you mean. The row of chevrons there as a space that is already functioning that way. If it were just curved and painted the right way, it would really function well.
Yeah, curved really, so that, you know, there was some thing saying don't drive over me, you know.
Oh yeah, definitely would curb all the ped refuges. So bikes in a roundabout is a whole nother conversation and an interesting one. You know, the best practices are going away from having an outside bike lane. The best practice has become either have the bikes join travel, because it's only, you know, 15 mile an hour or so movements through there. And most folks can do 15 miles an hour for a short period of time. And if you can't, the cars just slow down a bit, right? Not everybody loves that idea, but it does work. And that's part of the benefit of the roundabouts. The other option is to do a real lane for them. But the best practice is now pushing that out of the roadway because there were too many small crashes. And so now the idea is that if there's a bike lane, you're actually putting that up over the curb, combining it with the sidewalk, doing some sort of multi-use path, and the bikes make use of the crossings from that use those gores on each of the movements.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Like, I think a protected bike lane leading to a bike slip onto the sidewalk, you know, would be fine, with the option that the cyclist could have entered the roundabout prior to the protected slip off onto the sidewalk. You know, either way there, I think, you know, I like, you know, best practices are good. I just want to see bike implemented into the roundabouts rather than be an afterthought.
Yep. We played with a couple of those, and the sidewalks essentially turned into a multi-use path around it, which, you know, is not something we typically like to do, is mix bikes and peds. Mixing speed differentials is where trouble happens often. But that being said, in short stretches and with a wide enough multi-use path, it can be done. And, you know, sometimes you can stripe it and sign it and make sure to clarify who's supposed to be where.
Well, and as you just said, mixing speed differentials and weight differentials doesn't work too well on bikes and cars either. So one's a lot more deadly than the other.
Absolutely. Let's talk about some of these bike ped connections. So, you know, we've put these together based on sort of what was possible, because in some cases we've you know, got a set of constraints that is pointing us in only one direction, and then trying to be consistent with what the local plans have. But I think that there's a couple of places where maybe even the local plan is clear, but maybe we want to rethink it anyway. So let's get into some of those with the first, actually may as well go to the third slide, which is the first zoomed in. Yeah, there we go. Go one back if you would, please. All right, so Willow called for a multi-use path in the plan. So that's essentially what we have. You know, multi-use path, meaning it's up on the curb. It's a larger sidewalk, a wider sidewalk that can accommodate different speeds. When I take my dog on the walk, we take them a block over to a multi-use path that functions quite well for us, like that every evening. So this would connect through the interchange, and of course give bikes and peds the ability to visit whatever understructure uses end up in that Willow interchange, something we'll get back to you on next month. The path is already in existence on the east side, and on the west side, it sort of fades into just a sidewalk, but we will build that through the interchange. That would connect to the multi-use path that will run underneath the elevated structure. which is the dotted green lines going down into the downtown area. And so that would then connect to the second and third couplet, bike couplet that you have now. As you probably remember from last week, there's some complexities there because we wanted to bring in the downtown ramp. You remember all the conversation 16, 17 about downtown ramp. So that downtown ramp results in a disconnection on Simcoe. And in one of the alternatives, the second and third couplet don't function exactly like a couplet any longer. That's a little node we could spend some time working on if y'all have specific comments about how this is coming to pass. You know, it calls for a Shero on Simcoe, but if Simcoe's not connected all the way through, then that's a little bit of a moot point. Bike lanes on second and third would continue the existing facilities that are out there, and then give us a way to connect over to that northbound structure, which is the other long orange line, which would be where those bikes are coming up and down through the Evangeline Thruway corridor, at least in this depiction. As we all know, we just had a conversation about whether the bike should be on the southbound or the northbound, but whichever way, we would make sure that they're connecting with the second and third connections. Let's go to the next slide. Coming down, Louisiana was also showing a path. We can do something like that. It doesn't really connect very far over on the west, if I recall, but this would connect the facility over to the multi-use path that would be underneath the thruway, and also whatever sort of understructure programming is eventually put into place under the thruway. So that's kind of a good connection to make sure and complete. That's built into our design. 14th Street is only showing as a Shero, right? Now on Taft, there's this multi-use path-ish thing on the south side that starts at Cleveland, I think. I don't know if you can say Cleveland on the, where's Cleveland? Oh yeah. It starts at Cleveland and it comes up and it's, you know, I don't know, 10, maybe 11 feet wide, and it's offset from the curb by a little grass strip, little tree strip. So, you know, we're open to feedback about how we ought to really play with this. The plan calls for a Shero, but you've already got that multi-use path, but it's not very long. So it's really easy and low cost for us to put a Shero out there. Whether it's the best thing to do in that location, I think is somewhat up to y'all. It's what the plan said to do. And there are some right-of-way constraints we have there that make it difficult, as Gary will tell me. But that being said, you know, is that multi-use path on Taft well used? Do you think that's a significant connection? It will connect to the understructure pathway, so that'll be good. But then what do we do with it through the thruway? Think a Shero is the thing to do, or should we attempt to extend that path?
Derek, I think the path that's there, you know, extending that I think is a good idea. But on the road itself, that's a pretty wide road for the striping on the road. You know, from my memory, I thought there was a painted bike lane on Taft in that block before Jefferson, but I guess I'm wrong.
Well,
I'm looking at the aerial now, but
maybe you're right, because Matthew suggested something like that and had me scratching my head, but he said there's a bike lane out there now.
And so if the you know, if Taft, well, I'd like to make sure y'all are using the most up-to-date striping. If one of us is wrong, you know, I'd like to get that rectified. But on the thruway side of the railroad tracks, there's not much room, as you know, the lane width and all that is now. But on the Freetown side of the railroad tracks, there is very much room in that roadway, and traffic calming would be hugely beneficial to Freetown and generally all the way down through University to the University, because that road, you know, it's underutilized for its width and the intersections that follow between the Thruway and University tend to have a lot of traffic trying to go much faster than it needs to. So, having a improvement in the infrastructure on Taft, would be a benefit as well.
I understand what you're saying. We are only going to really make improvements to the part of Taft that we have to make improvements to, and aren't going to try to fix the corridor outside of our footprint. But that being said, there's an integration with whatever the vision is for that fix and the portion that we work on, right?
Well, Derek, I thought it was my understanding that y'all are trying to mitigate the impacts on Freetown, Puerto Rico, that the infrastructure that y'all are building for the freeway design will cause. And so if you are mitigating impacts, being that y'all aren't planning or trying to avoid and minimize the sound problem or the visual problems, because y'all are still putting this there, I think, a mitigating feature would be improving the bike and ped infrastructure through traffic calming within the Freetown, Puerto Rico neighborhood. I think that's a very low ask on a feeder road to the infrastructure that y'all are building as a mitigating project. I don't think that falls outside of the scope of what y'all claim to be doing or proposing to be doing, nor outside of the demands of the FHWA's processes regarding Section 106. And I think it fits within the CSS claims as well. So I don't think that is something that y'all shouldn't be doing or is outside of the scope of what y'all are doing. I think it fully fits within what y'all claim to be doing.
Yeah, it could be a mitigation. You're right. Mitigation can extend outside the typical footprint in different ways. Yes, sir.
Definitely got that one noted.
Ashley, are you with us? You're in this group, right? I was just wondering if you had some thoughts about this Taft arrangement and the bikes, because I know you know that system fairly well. I think you're with us.
I don't know if y'all can hear me. You can probably hear me now. I had to put it on speaker. I'm on my AirPods, and they don't typically work very well.
We can hear you.
I mean, okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's really exciting. A lot of the infrastructure proposed to do, I think a lot of the big things with the multi-use path and the wide sidewalks are really exciting because, that's really a big feature that we have in Lafayette, and people tend to utilize those type of facilities at a higher rate than even a lot of our on-stripe facilities. And, anything that we can do to help develop out the bike network and the pedestrian network, we're here to assist with that.
Right.
And
yeah,
maybe
I think
this
it's really interesting, like what you had in those first slides. I was really excited. I think when the first time that we saw them earlier in the meeting with the you had all the different options for the people who feel comfortable and the people who don't feel comfortable. I think that that's going to be really, really important to making sure that we have a wide range of people using the facilities. And there's a lot of times we do in Lafayette, we have built facilities, and then especially with the striping ones, like the striping will kind of leave, or people will say like, I don't feel comfortable with that particular facility. And, I'm really excited at the care that's being given to making sure that the facilities are in compliance with design regulations and that they are, made to be more permanent than striping.
I would also add that y'all's map here is incorrect. From Taft towards University, it is a bike lane. It is not a Shero. On Taft from Garfield towards University is a built existing bike path.
Yeah, from Garfield further out.
Are you talking about stripes, Charles, or is it? I mean, it's striped.
Yes, it is. It is striped as a bike lane. It has a striped bike lane with a striped protection between the bike lane and the travel lanes. And
There's no vertical element. There's definitely no vertical element right there.
there's no vertical element, but there is a 3-foot striped lane, and the turning lane's been taken out to do it. There's been a road diet on it, and it connects to the Garfield bike lane.
We're going to do some more thinking about TAF. That may be something that we want to bring back to the bike committee, which is a smaller group of folks who are very focused on all this stuff. So TAF is something we're definitely going to keep taking a look at.
I think,
and then going down,
and I think a start would be making sure that you're, using accurate mapping to know what you're feeding into, rather than having to, get answers.
Well, unless it were mitigation,
actual,
we wouldn't.
I'm sorry, if you're designing something to connect to something else, regardless of mitigation, I think even in y'all's modeling, et cetera, if y'all aren't using accurate data, then this whole process is going to be flawed. And that's a problem I've had from the get-go. And it's something that continually, I keep seeing in every little map that pops up. There's always something, and this is the TAF thing's been like this for years. It's not a new.
Well, yes, Charles, that's because it's from my bike map that I made for Lafayette when I worked for Lafayette, and nobody from Lafayette ever corrected it. They said they added a bike lane on TAF.
So my question would be,
how am I supposed to know that if no one from Public Works tells me that they put in a bike lane on TAF when I've shown them this map a million times at a million public meetings?
So nobody from LCP.
No, nobody from LCG.
I'm not saying LCG. I'm saying nobody with the Lafayette Connector partners in the whole project has taken the time to survey.
Yes, they have. They've surveyed them many times. I've surveyed them. They have surveyed them. They spoke to the bike committee. They showed this particular map to the bike committee. I've showed this map to a million committees. I showed this map to Public Works. I showed this map to planning. No one has ever told me about this bike lane on Taft.
Okay.
And I've sent it to them a million times because I just adopted the bike plan recently.
So nobody's looked at the project at the roadways themselves. That's what I'm saying.
Yes,
Nobody's
I have. But I mean, like, if I don't know the I don't know the extent when they're going to do it, or if they're even going to maintain it. Maybe they haven't made it's just striping. Maybe they haven't made it to maintain the bike lane.
Okay, Ashley, I'm not trying to make accusations.
Well, I mean,
we
have, and you are making strong accusations because a lot of this is coming from, I have to rely on other people to provide the information. And if other people, for whatever reason, are not providing me the information, and I mean, like, I just, what am I supposed to do when I send maps to people and I circulate them and I do all of that? I know Derek has done the same thing. If people are not providing the information, then what are we supposed to do about that? Like, every little thing like this is not being to be taken as, well, this whole thing, it's just.
Okay, Ashley, this is probably my fault, Ashley, because I was the one that did the QC on that. And I've been so focused on that multi-use path that exists on the south side of Taft and thinking that was the bones we build off of, that was what was in my mind. And that continues well outside of the study footprint. And so I was all locked into that path that's offset from the curb. So that inaccuracy is mine alone and not yours to own, Ashley. So
okay. So my point, and this is for the whole project across the board. If the surveyors aren't providing accurate information, then the purported right-of-way that y'all are discussing might not be accurate. The lanes that y'all are discussing might not be accurate because that y'all are discussing might not be. Taft has used to be a 3-lane road with a turn lane in the center. That's not even there anymore. So the traffic demand that y'all are modeling down that road might not be accurate. And Ashley saying, well,
I've lost sound. like